Okay, welcome. Happy holidays, everyone. Welcome to Casco Bay Views and News with Casco Baykeeper Ivy Frignoca. I am not Ivy. I am Will Everett. I'm the interim director at Friends of Casco Bay, and we're excited to have folks join us for this event. And it's so nice to see everyone's faces. For those of you that are on screen, this will be a little different event than we've done. We are doing this meeting style so that people can have their screens on and talk in real time with us once we get to the question and answer period. So I'm going to do a bit of housekeeping and then introduce Ivy. This event, we would love to do this in person. We're not able to just yet, so it is nice to be able to see you all live. And I'm glad that you could join us for this afternoon. Friends of Casco Bay, our mission is to improve and protect the health of Casco Bay. We do that through science, through collecting data and observations about how Casco Bay is changing and the health of Casco Bay. We do it through community engagement, having the community take part in stewardship efforts to help take care of this amazing place. And we do it through advocacy, working to change laws and behaviors to protect Casco Bay for future generations. And it's this last part, the advocacy part, that this event today, we're going to take a deeper dive on. And I'm going to invite Ivy Frignoca, our Casco Baykeeper, to join me in the middle of the screen here. We are going to be on spotlight. So the two of us will be in the middle of the screen as we talk. And for the first half an hour, I have some questions for Ivy to talk about some of our biggest advocacy wins this year for Casco Bay, and to talk about what she sees as the most important issues coming over our bow as we enter 2022. I'm so glad Ivy is here to share time with us. Ivy is a passionate advocate. She has been our baykeeper now for going into her 7th year, and she talks about herself as being the Lorax of the sea, and we're lucky to have her. So welcome aboard, Ivy.
Thanks, Will.
So I'm going to start off with a question, just in the big picture. What do we mean when we say baykeeping? What is baykeeping in our advocacy work as far as Friends of Casco Bay is concerned?
So to be a water keeper, there's lake keepers, river keepers, bay keepers. There's probably about 300 water keepers around the world who are part of a water keeper alliance. And if you look at sort of the definition of a baykeeper, it's someone who works to preserve and protect water. And we do that work. We speak for the water with the backing of our local communities and the participation of our local communities. That's kind of like the dictionary definition. But to be a water keeper, every water keeper I know, including myself, we all bring to it sort of a unique passion and connection with the water. So for me, I honestly, I remember as a baby having dreams of floating in the water. And I remember the first time my mother placed me in the water to swim, and just completely relaxing and feeling part of the water. And so it's so intrinsically intertwined with who I am as a person. So this caring for Casco Bay, I do it with the community. I give a voice to a resource that can't speak for itself. And it's something that, I just feel a very deep personal connection with.
And as the voice of the Bay, what would you say the biggest threats to the Bay are? If the Bay could speak, hey, this is happening to me, what is the Bay saying? What's the Bay telling us?
I was asked this question almost 7 years ago on when I first became baykeeper on a 207 interview. And I said the climate change and stormwater pollution. And being asked 7 years later, I would change climate change to climate crisis. And stormwater pollution remains a top concern because it's aggravated by the climate crisis that we're experiencing, and because it's very hard to find the solutions to.
And as the climate crisis, climate change, it's huge, it's by definition, a worldwide problem.
Mhm.
What's our role? How are we wrapping an advocacy, wrapping our arms around this problem that is so humongous, and yet affecting these waters right here in front of us?
First off, by acknowledging that it's humongous and huge and takes a lot of solutions from a lot of different people, and then not getting despondent over that. Our role is really focused on, and baykeeping is really focused on speaking and protecting our water. So as an organization and as Casco Baykeeper, the mission is to reduce the causes of climate change to Casco Bay, which obviously has broader impact and requires broader solution, and to help address the consequences of climate change to Casco Bay so that it can be resilient to inevitable change. Like, even if we were to completely reduce greenhouse gas emissions tomorrow, which is impossible, there's so much excess in the atmosphere that we're going to be living with the consequences of climate change for years to come.
And you know, and when you say climate crisis and stormwater, both of these things, they affect each other, right? I mean,
Yes.
like when we talk about the biggest issues of the Bay, climate change is essentially almost like a magnifying glass on each of the other issues affecting the Bay.
Yes, and it makes it more difficult because the change is more like a verb, not a noun. You know, we're calling it climate change, but everything keeps changing. So the work that Mike is doing to monitor the health of the Bay, and then the advocacy that I am leading in response to what we're seeing in the Bay, we have to keep being forward thinking and being willing to be nimble in response to changing conditions. And I would also say, since we are a three-pronged organization, that our water reporters help us because they're documenting these continual changes, and that really helps us as well.
Great. And we at Friends of Casco Bay, one of our values is valuing the incremental change. We know we can't change everything overnight.
Absolutely.
It's chipping away at these problems. And we've had some pretty big victories, pretty big chips off the block
Big
here
chips
in
this
20.
year, yes, definitely.
Did you want to talk about those?
Sure. So I mentioned, I'm going to focus on stormwater first, and know that it is related to climate change. But I mentioned that stormwater is difficult because it's harder to find the solutions to. And under the Clean Water Act, discharges that come out of pipes, ditches, or other conveyances, they're called point sources, and that's what the Clean Water Act regulates. So there are a few categories of stormwater that the Clean Water Act regulates. And one of those is stormwater that's discharged through storm source systems because it comes out of pipes and other conveyances. And then a lot of the pollution from stormwater, like what sheets off of our lawns directly into waterways or off of parking lots directly into waterways, is not regulated. So those solutions are more difficult. So the big leverage points that we have are to look at where we can making changes in permits. And in 2021, after 5 years of work, we had some major advances in the Ms4 permit.
All right, Ms4, wait, that sounds complicated.
Yeah, wait, what, right? So I stopped there because I thought you might want to say, what is an Ms4 permit?
Yeah.
So it's the municipal separate storm sewer system permit. Because there's 4 words that start with S, it's called the Ms4 permit. And that permit regulates what comes out of pipes from storm sewer systems in Maine's most urbanized communities. So in the Casco Bay region, there are 11 towns that are in the greater Portland area that have their storm sewer systems regulated by this permit.
And When you say stormwater, this was when I started at Friends of Casco Bay in 2006. We've been working on stormwater for a long time up to that point. And when I started, I was trying to wrap my head around the like, why do we care about stormwater? It sounds like rain. Like, why? It's been raining for millennia, right? Like, what's the big deal about stormwater? Why are you so passionate about that?
Just got asked this question earlier this week, and it's because the rain washes what's ever on the landscape, and particularly in more built environments where we have so much hard surface, being buildings or parking lots and roadways. It's going to carry all the pollution that's on there. None of it's going to leach into the ground because those surfaces are hard, into our storm sewer system and out into our bays, or directly into the tributaries to Casco Bay and Casco Bay. So it carries a mix of toxic pollutants. And as proof in point, there's actually over 30 urban waterways in Maine that are listed as impaired due to stormwater pollution that sheets off of these hard surfaces. And it's called the impervious cover, the hard surfaces. So we care a lot because there's a constant and differing mix of pollutants that gets delivered to water every time there's a storm. And B, with climate change, just in the last century, we have over 6 inches more of rain, and that trend will continue to go up. And we have more intense storms, sometimes after periods of drought, which means that lots of pollutants can build up on a landscape and then whoosh, get flushed in these very intense and heavy rainstorms. So it's an existing problem, and we expect it to be an increasing problem.
We had this big victory from the moment that you started basically working with us. You were working on almost essentially on trying to solve this big urban stormwater problem. And we had a lot of movement on that this year. And what will be different in 2022 because of your work?
The MS4 permit, it's a permit that renews every 5 years, like all Clean Water Act permits. So every 5 years, you get another opportunity to look at the situation and change the terms of a permit to address current pollution problems. And the permit that is here now is it's 4 years overdue for renewing. It's taken 5 years of advocacy and an appeal to the Board of Environmental Protection, but it now has 3 major advances in it that will make a huge difference to the water quality in the tributaries to Casco Bay and to Casco Bay. And those are that this permit for the first time requires the municipalities covered by the permit to test what is coming out of their stormwater outfalls. And if they detect bacteria, and in some instances, they also have to test for nitrogen, they then must trace that back to the source and eliminate that source of pollution. The second big advancement is with development. And we know that there's a lot of development pressure in Greater Portland. And we also know, as I just mentioned, that there's already lots of streams that are impaired from existing development. And so this permit will require for new development and when properties are redeveloped, especially properties that disturb an acre or more, will require them to use low impact development techniques. That's a pretty loaded big term, but basically what it means is techniques that will try to keep the hydrology of the site the way that it would have been without development. In other words, allow stormwater to filter and be treated. And these could include things as simple as setbacks. It could include treatment systems. It could include plantings on roofs, green roofs. There's a whole bunch of aspects. And then the third part of the permit, that's a big advancement, is for every one of those urban impaired streams, the municipalities covered by the permit have to take 3 actions to restore water quality. And one of those actions, if it applies, is that they can adopt a fertilizer ordinance. So those are huge.
Totally huge. So so that covers the most urban areas around the Portland area, essentially what, Scarborough to Cumberland along the rim of the bay.
And
Yeah.
Yarmouth is also
And
included,
Yarmouth.
and it goes into, I think it goes in as far as Wyndham. I can't remember the all 11 off the top of my head, but they all work collaboratively to implement the MS4 permit.
So that will become official in a week or so, that permit. So
Yes.
around December 23rd, is that right?
Yes, it will
So
certainly
you
be a
folks-
holiday present to have that official.
Yeah. So the folks, you there on your call, this is kind of breaking news, a big deal and a big win for us. So it is exciting to hear that. And so we checked that box, but what on stormwater in 2022 then? What's coming over our bow and on that issue?
So they want to create the low impact development ordinance that the municipalities in the Casco Bay region got a grant and are working to develop a model ordinance that requires the use of LID, as it's called, low impact development. And we are providing match for that to support getting additional grant funds. And we're participating in the stakeholder process and helping to collect materials and do the background research to make this as good of an ordinance as can happen. And then probably transitioning into more broadly into climate change. We also have been repeatedly asking, politely but firmly, that the Department of Environmental Protection revise the rest of its stormwater rules, what regulates stormwater from construction and redevelopment everywhere, not just in MS4 communities, at the same time, so that the watershed would be completely protected. And DEP has agreed to do that.
All right. And before we get to the climate change aspect, and I just want to reflect that working with the municipalities on this grant and the model ordinance, I mean, I think that's something that really separates our work from a lot of environmental groups. That we said, hey, in this permit, hey, you have to pass a low impact development ordinance. You have to protect the bay to do that. A lot of groups, I think, would walk away and say, okay, go do that. We're staying involved and saying, hey, we're a partner in this. We want to work with you to make the best ordinance as possible.
So in some ways, my job is easy, right? My job is to improve and protect Casco Bay. That sounds easy, but it's a big job. And then it also means sometimes taking stands that may differ from our colleagues, our outside colleagues that we collaborate with. And this is one of those instances where the municipalities did not want to develop the model ordinance. They wanted the state to do the stormwater regulations instead. And they're really two different things and two different things that need to happen under the Clean Water Act. And so what we tried to do is we always must remain firm in doing what's best for the bay, but we also always must be respectful and listen to our colleagues and try to find ways to achieve what we need to do for the bay that help. And so in this instance, what we did, Will, was listen to the municipalities, worked on language in the permit with EPA and DEP agreement. DEP writes permits in Maine, EPA oversees that. And we all agreed to give the municipalities until, give them a 2-year period of time, 1 year to adopt this model ordinance, send it to DEP for approval, and then 1 year to get it implemented through the town process. So now there's a lot of excitement about this because people are realizing that this is going to be really huge and really make a difference for water quality. And everyone, whether they're working for the municipality, they're a consultant that's hired, or they're the baykeeper, everybody's doing this because they want to reduce pollution.
All right. And you said stormwater and climate change, the climate crisis is obviously the other biggest threat to the Bay,
Yes.
an existential threat to us all. Well, what was some of the big movement for Casco Bay on that in 2021?
So in 2021, we shifted from helping to shape the recommendations, the coastal and marine recommendations that ended up in the Maine Won't Wait Climate Action Plan, to beginning to see how to implement them, translating a plan into action. And one of the biggest things that we did was the governor introduced a bill to adopt uniform sea level rise projections in all of Maine's coastal land use regulation for 2050 and 2100. And we asked the governor's staff before the bill got into the legislature if they would expand the language of that bill to include what's known as Strategy F, which is a long list, has an appendix with a long list of coastal land use regulations that need to be revised to be forward thinking, so that all of our coastal land use regulation thinks about increased storm surge, different future modeling of what a floodplain is going to look like, and other consequences of climate change. So it's not just putting in sea level rise, but it's doing all the regulatory reform that's necessary. And just a couple of examples of why this is important. If you have 1 foot of sea level rise, which we're projected to have more than that by 2050, the hours of nuisance flooding, like when the wharfs in Portland are flooded or streets are flooded in Harpswell, will go up to about 142 hours. And so that's huge. And it's estimated by 2050, if we don't act, that there'll be $17.5 billion worth of damage to Maine's coast. So doing this regulatory work is a huge deal. Getting that language in the bill and getting it passed is a huge deal, because it required the state agencies then to go through and set a timetable for revising all of these regulations. They'll submit that to the legislature in January. We used that to get the stormwater rules prioritized. And then we will be very involved in the administrative rulemaking process to help make Maine's laws as best as possible.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the thing that makes that so exciting is that our laws weren't very nimble relative. They weren't written to be nimble relative to climate change, right?
No one's yes, correct.
And what the sea level rise, it sounds like it's just about sea level rise, but buried in there is looking at all of our land use laws and our stormwater laws, and it's saying, hey, let's be nimble about this.
Yes, it's saying let's not rely on 100 years of past data, which we know won't apply because conditions are changing. Let's take the best available data now and the best available modeling and projections of future conditions and make decisions based on that. And so it makes us forward thinking. And also then what you were saying about being nimble, trying to allow some flexibility in laws so that they can easily be amended as we learn more or conditions change.
And hey, let's not look back, let's look forward. We know this freight train is coming at us.
Exactly.
And that climate change work can kind of come in 2 big buckets. There's one that you're talking, this one that we've been talking about is on the adaptation side. Hey, this train is coming, let's prepare the depot to handle it. The other is that is mitigating it, stopping what's causing climate change to begin with. And do you want to talk about where we are with that?
Sure. So our work until now has largely focused on the resilience and adaptation side. In part, there are very few advocates who do this work. There's a lot of times I'm the only voice pressing for this kind of change, like with the sea level rise resolve conversation, or in the Ms4 Permit arena. And what we've done on the causes side is sign on and support reasonable policies. And now that the solution is to look toward our oceans for the source of clean energy and development of offshore wind farms, our attention has necessarily turned to looking at offshore wind, both as a way to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and then to make sure that if offshore wind is developed, that it doesn't harm our waters, and particularly where Casco Bay may be a site for a connection point for a research array, and who knows what ports or whatever will be developed yet. We just don't know.
And our connection with that isn't so much that the offshore wind is going to be placed in Casco Bay. It's this connection part. Do you want to talk a little bit more what you mean by that?
Sure.
So the wind turbines will be far offshore, but connected to land, possibly through Casco Bay.
Yeah. So this is like a two-step process, and everything is happening really fast. First, the governor's office proposed and is going ahead with a research array in federal waters to study offshore wind. During that process, in response to concerns of fishermen, especially lobstermen, the governor agreed to a moratorium, and there's now a statute passed, a moratorium on development of offshore wind in state waters, other than two very small sort of research projects already happening in state waters. So yes, the siting of these offshore wind farms will be in the Gulf, and that makes sense anyway, because that's where the wind is really strong and constant and has been identified as a way to provide power to large masses of people. One of the connection points for the research array could be at Wyman Station on Cousins Island, and the other is Maine Yankee. So the old former Maine Yankee site. So that is part of what drew us into this originally, was looking at that.
And in reference to time, we're going to get to question and answer in a minute. So just in a minute or two, Ivy, what would you say the three biggest areas or buckets of work for baykeeping or advocacy will be in 2022? We're about to flip the calendar here.
Okay, well, first, just to finish off, I'll do them in sort of reverse order on the offshore wind piece. I'm on the Environment and Wildlife Working Group for Maine's roadmap for offshore wind development. And we just finished drafting our recommendations, and they will go out for public comment early in the new year. So I expect to be doing programming for our members so that people can ask questions and learn about these and comment as they want to do, as we did, similar to what we did with the climate action plan. So expect that work to continue. On the sea level rise resolve and the regulatory reform, I really see that as a huge part of my work in 2022, is helping to actually implement these changes. Maine is on the leading edge of addressing climate change in this way, and it's so critical. And when I reach out to my fellow water keepers around the country, so few people are doing this kind of work. So that will be really big, and working on the model ordinance. I've been just summarizing what I was saying earlier. Those will be three really big pieces of advocacy. There's much other work that I will be doing, but I want to let people get to questions, and hopefully the other work will come up during the question and answer time.
All right. Yeah. So let's switch to question and answer. So you folks that were invited to take part in this, actually, we invite you because you are water reporters and because you are strong supporters, steadfast members of Friends at Casco Bay, kind of a special cadre of people that we care about and that care about Casco Bay. So here's your time with the Casco Baykeeper. So to ask questions, you can do it a couple ways. You can click the raise hand button, and Ivy and I will call on you when we see your hand raised, and you will end up being unmuted and can ask your question live to Ivy, or you can ask your question in the chat, and as we see the questions in the chat, we can get them answered. So if you have a question for Ivy or for any of us on staff here at Friends of Casco Bay, now's the time to raise your hand and join in the conversation here. All right. So Pat is first with her hand raised. Welcome, Pat.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Ivy. That was excellent. Although I have a million nitpicky questions, I won't do them. I have two more general nitpicky ones, and hopefully I'm not the only one with these. I'm just curious, are there any other locales within the municipal or state level within the country that have developed LIDs and implemented them?
Yes. So
And that's low impact development standards.
yes. So as part of this process, the first step is a white paper looking at all of that. So I have reached out to Region 1 EPA and gotten their resources, and especially the work that's been done in Massachusetts and New Hampshire to develop an ordinance under their Ms4 permit. They did a similar collaborative effort. And other people are reaching out to their sources. And so we've collected a suite of samples. And then we will, my legal intern in the spring and I will take 2 of those resources and add them to a big Excel spreadsheet, and other people will take other ones across categories, so that we then have a document that compares and contrasts all of the models, so that we can develop based on what works and what hasn't worked, lessons learned.
And these will be developed with a requirement at a state level in Maine for the municipalities to adopt and implement, correct?
Yes, so the Ms4 permit requires municipalities to take clear, specific, and measurable actions. That's the legal catchphrase, to reduce stormwater pollution from new development and redevelopment to the maximum extent practicable. And that's what this LID ordinance will do. So that is what is required under the Clean Water Act and its implementing regulations of municipalities.
Okay. I see Dan has a question. I'll hold my second question until later.
Okay, thanks, Pat.
Sure, we'll go to Dan. Dan Emery, one of our first water reporters, among our first cadre of volunteer water reporters, and longtime supporter of Friends of Casco Bay. Welcome aboard, Dan.
Hi, Dan.
Well, thanks, Will, and congratulations on the great work, Ivy and Will and the group in general. I'm just sort of wondering, given that, as you've described, climate change is such a all-encompassing, interwoven topic, I'm wondering if there are opportunities for advocacy that you would like to do, but that you can't do, either because you don't have enough time or because it's not directly enough connected to the bay or to water, and sort of, if there are, how you sort of prioritize your decisions and what to work on.
That is an excellent question. I just want to say first to other people, please ask questions. I know these first 2 questions from Pat and Dan have come from 2 other lawyers. You're getting to see a very wonky behind the scenes. This is like as if Mike were talking to you about how he calibrates equipment. Okay, like you're getting to see behind the scenes what I do. But I can be unwonky too. So ask your questions or ask any interpretation that you want. So now, Dan, getting back to your question, the first lens that I focus on is how the issues at hand or the concerns relate to our mission to improve and protect Casco Bay. And I do that within collaborative groups. So Mike and I just started like a Rivers to Casco Bay group, which you should be very excited about because it includes advocates for the Royal River. And so like in the context of that, we might look at, okay, who's going to take the lead on the dam piece on the Royal River, the upgrade on the Presumpscot, the regulations. And so I try to leverage the ability to do the work by working with other partners and having, doing the best we can collaboratively to use thin resources. The second piece that has been really instrumental to allow me to be involved in so many huge topics is that I've been running this externship program with the law school. And I really don't think I could do my job without the assistance because I don't have the time to go and dig through all the regulations or research specific case law on a particular topic. So I get the law students to do that work for me, prepare memos, and then I can go in and do my work. So it's tricky, but I'm doing the best I can to to cover as much as I can and then put realistic boundaries on the work.
And obviously, well, Ivy is our lead advocate. The whole staff and our board and our volunteers really support her and support, the advocacy work that we're doing. So that it isn't a one-woman show. It is a whole organization and community behind it all. We have a couple questions on the chat.
Yeah.
That I want to hop to.
I was going to share those if that's helpful, Will.
Sure.
Go ahead, Sarah.
So one of them related to what you were just saying is one of our water reporters, Trish, is asking, will the focus of water reporters look different in 2022? And feel free here, Ivy, I think too, to talk about their work in 2021, if that's a helpful frame of reference. Okay. And if so, in what way, she's asking. And she says she looks forward to working together as a water reporter, looking ahead.
So first I want to say what Will said was absolutely correct. And it goes back to the definition of a water keeper, which is that we work with a lot of engagement from the local communities. And I was talking more on the professional side in response to Dan's question about the professional communities I work within, but certainly, within the organization and with our members and volunteers, and Erno, who's on this call, is helping actually with covering offshore wind meetings. We're split. I'm going to the ones I'm going to, he's going to some other ones, and we're chatting. So yes, it definitely takes a village. And I have been assigned the role as Casco Baykeeper as the voice of the Bay, but I have many people whispering in my ears and helping me out. So what the water reporters do is they are the eyes that help out, and they ask so many great questions. And so in 2021, every year we continue to do trainings with water reporters. And in 2021, one of the really great changes was the expansion of our water reporters into tracking coastal habitats and really beginning to track in a more nuanced way the observations about climate change. Really people ask themselves the questions, what do I see? How's it different than last time? That sort of thing. And in 2022, we expect that will be really important to continue. And I also expect to have a really good conversation with Sarah soon as she heads up that program, because we have some ideas for trainings and possible other things that people might track for us. So one of the changes that Sarah and I are talking about, for example, and I don't want to get out ahead of our program development, but just Trish, to give you an example, is going a little bit more above head of tide and maybe beginning to track some of what's happening in the tributaries. Next question.
So we had another, oh, go ahead, Sarah.
So we just had another one come in right now that was around the Ms4 permit, and it sounds like municipalities are excited. How has it been received by developers? Can you talk about that? And in these processes, people can be critical, and how you work with them to understand how to implement these things.
So I haven't talked to developers about this. Let me phrase this as that one of the concerns of the municipalities were that if just the MS4 communities had to implement these ordinances, that developers might choose to go elsewhere to develop. And so not only was it important for the Bay to make sure that the state revised Chapter 500 to be complementary to the changes the MS4 communities were doing, but it sort of levels the playing field. And so I think it's a question. It's a good question, and that's what I can offer on it for right now.
And then just Chapter 500, it sounds like a really long book, but that's essentially the state's stormwater rules.
Yes, thanks, Will, for reminding me. So sorry, this is one of those wonky moments. So when the legislature passes a statute, and in this case, they passed a statute saying the Department of Environmental Protection could regulate stormwater discharges from construction sites disturbing greater than an acre. Then they give the department rulemaking authority to set up how they're actually going to regulate stormwater or whatever it is. And so the chapter of rules that regulate stormwater is known as Chapter 500.
And then we had another question on the chat earlier about future plans for Cousins Island. So we brought up, I think this is probably in reference to the to offshore wind. That the way I've understood it is offshore wind has essentially two easy places. There's other places they could do it, but two easy places to plug in to New England's grid system in Maine. And one of them is the Cousins Island Wyman Station plant. And then the other one is up in Wiscasset, where Maine Yankee would be, because these two places have dealt with a lot of electricity. It's easy to plug in there. Am I getting that right, Ivy?
Yeah, sort of the right cables and the right storage and the right connections. So there's infrastructure that already exists at both places that is not being used, in simple terms. So so the question was specific to Cousins Island. Would you please repeat the question?
The question was relatively simple. Peter Lindsay asked it, and you can feel free, Peter, to come on or raise your hand and come on the screen if you want to ask it in a deeper way. But can you talk more about future plans for the Cousins Island plant, Wyman Station?
Yeah,
Peter.
so this is what I know about Wyman Station. So it's what's known as a peak facility, which means it doesn't run all the time. It's expensive to run. And so it only runs when there is a very high need for power. And then the electric grid will call upon it to produce power. And so that is called a peak facility. And for the way that facilities get called on is they bid into a marketplace. It's a forward capacity market. And I'm not a utility expert, so do my best here. And they say, this is what we can provide power for, this amount of money. And for several years, that plant bid into the market and was not selected at all. And now they were selected. So the plant will remain in operation in some respect because it is in the queue to be used in the forward capacity market. I think that's like, I can't remember how many years out that is, but at least a couple of years out. So that means that we're not, it is unclear what will happen there because it will still be run and it's still being paid to be maintained, and it will still be run as a power plant. So in light of that, I am aware of no plans to decommission it or do anything like that.
And do,
I know Pat had another question. Did she want to ask it? And looks like Robbie has a question too.
Everyone, I am a Friends of Casco Bay staff writer, and as our newest staffer, I've had the opportunity over the past year to ask a lot of questions, learn a lot of new things, and as I was listening to Ivy talk about stormwater so much, it had me thinking about there's so many different pollutants that we might find in stormwater, but it can often be difficult to figure out where can they all come from, what do they look like when we just say stormwater delivers a lot of toxic material to Casco Bay. And I was wondering, Ivy, if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yes. So that is why so what happens with the streams that are impaired due to stormwater, Robbie, is that because one storm might deliver like a lot of products from car exhaust and another one, you know, it could just anything that's on the landscape, right? All kinds of chemicals that are on the landscape from whatever purpose, or fertilizers or whatever is there. And it varies with storm and by load. What DEP does instead of measuring for a specific pollutant in the streams to measure impairment is they look at other water quality indicators. And for most of these streams, what they look at is the biology that's able to live in the stream. So they'll look at all the literally like little bugs, like the mayfly nymphs and dragonfly nymphs, and compare what exists in a stream to what should exist in a healthy stream. And if they find only the most hardy species there, then they know that it is impaired. And as a proxy for the pollutant load, instead of saying you have to reduce, you know, PAHs by this amount or nitrogen by this amount or whatever, they say you have to reduce the amount of developed surface, impervious cover, because then that in turn will reduce the loads of pollution that are delivered. So it's not neat and easy, but it was a way to honestly acknowledge the problem and try to work at solving it.
and then Pat had another question in the chat, and actually I was going to ask you this earlier when you were talking about our the big win on stormwater in terms of Ms4 permits. So the Ms4 communities, we talked about 11 communities near the bay, around the bay, going up to Yarmouth. And these are the kind of, it's basically the greater Portland area region that stormwater win applies to. Now, Falmouth, Cumberland, Yarmouth are all smaller towns than Brunswick, right? Brunswick's the other another big town along Casco Bay on the eastern side. Brunswick and some of the towns, Harpswell, Pittsburgh, Freeport, don't fall under the Ms4 permits. What are we doing with the other towns that don't fall into the having to meet these stormwater rules?
I think Freeport does. Okay, so first, just to clarify, what you're referring to, Brunswick doesn't fall under it. That seems crazy. What happens is who is covered by the Ms4 permit is determined by looking at the US Census, and then they look at urbanized areas. So the greater Brunswick Topsom area is growing, and it's likely that they will be covered by the Ms4 permit in the future, that population bubble will be included. Like Lewiston, Auburn is, Brunswick, Bangor, Brewer area, and southern Maine, like your Kittery area, has enough of an urban population that it's covered. So that that question is why it was so important to get the state chapter 500 stormwater regulations revised at the same time and get a commitment from DEP to do that, so that we will have uniform advancement of stormwater regulation in both MS4 and non-MS4 communities.
And that's going to be a large focus of your work on the
Yes.
advocacy side in 2022 is evening the playing field, getting
Yes.
our state, trying to get our state rules.
Yes, and the municipalities were saying the state should lead the charge. And so it felt, we agree the state should be doing this work as well. So that's why we were so adamant in getting the language into the sea level rise resolve and working with DEP, and we're grateful that they agree.
Okay, and we're getting towards the end here. We probably have room for one or two more questions. I'm going to take one of them if someone else has a question. And Skip has a question here, so we'll go to you, Skip.
Thank you. This more specific science pollution related question. What contribution to bay water issues do gasoline power boats like my little boat make to the bay?
I do not know. It's so interesting because we were thinking about even like overboard discharges, like how can you see if people have marine sanitation devices on board, or they're violating the fact that Casco Bay is a no discharge zone and they jump overboard to pee in the bay, for lack of a more graceful way to say it. And when I talk to scientists about monitoring that, it's just so difficult to do. And I would invite my colleague, Mike, if he has anything to add to that, to please jump on, because I don't know.
And more specifically, Ivy or Mike, most of us that I know are pretty responsible. So
Yes.
I'm talking mostly about the engine, the water, the fuel, the discharge, the exhaust, rather than people purposely dumping stuff overboard.
So all I know on that front is that we asked the state to update its study on the discharges from vessels and what impact they were having. And they did that voluntarily without the need for legislation. And they did that to help inform the climate action plan process. So we made sure that it was considered, and there just wasn't good data. Like they'd had some with respect to cruise ships. There's some information related to the, that helps set the vessel general permit at a federal level, but there just wasn't a lot of really great information. The big thing that sticks in my mind is that the role that exhaust from boats plays is so minor compared to the energy sector and transportation. So Mike, would you please help me out here if you know anything else?
I wish I could. No, I think you covered it well. I just really don't know what nitrous oxides and the emissions from small boat engines might contribute.
Well, then I'll feel comfortable to continue to motor around and do water reporting on the bay then, till we learn anything different.
Very good.
Yeah, hopefully the thing that happens at the federal level is updating regulations, and so that as boats are newer, they're going to have newer engines that are less polluting, and hybrid engines and things like that. But we're still in transition. So
yeah, and on the mitigation side, on that front, it was energy sources. Where the heck we're getting our energy to turn on our lights and have events like this, as well as the transportation. I mean, we just have very little public transportation. Everybody needs to get in a vehicle to get anywhere often. And those were by far the largest sources when the Maine Climate Council looked at, hey, where can we have the biggest impact in limiting CO2 It wasn't on your little boat. It was on, you know, transportation at large and on energy.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, we're just about to the end here, so I'll let you close things out, Ivy.
I just want to really thank you all. First off, we just miss you so much. It's hard not to see everyone in person. And the biggest hope for 2022 is that we can do in-person events again and get out in the field more with people. Just also really want to thank you all for your support in whatever way you support our work. And that just means so much to us, and it enables us to do what we do. And finally, thank you. I mean, I don't get to do this kind of like behind the scenes, you know, it's, who wants to talk about regulation? But it makes such a huge difference for the Bay. And it's the kind of, you know, as I said earlier, it's like, you know, Mike and I, the work that we do, we have a lot of assurance in, because both of us spend so much time researching and studying and choosing the best methodology and making sure we're making the best decisions on the science and advocacy side for Casco Bay. So thank you so much for helping us do that.
Thank you, everyone.